My son smiled, then handed me eviction papers at Thanksgiving. He thought the sheriff had come to throw me out. He had no idea that before dessert, the same sheriff would read one sentence that would destroy their entire plan and leave my own son in handcuffs. Stay with me, because what happened next changed our family forever. Before I tell you what happened, in my own dining room on a Thursday afternoon, that was supposed to be about turkey and gratitude, I want to know a little about you. Tell me your name in the comments. Tell me what city you are watching this from right now. Tell me how old you are, because I am 71 years old and I have lived long enough to know that the people who watch these stories are the kindest people on this whole earth. And if you love your grandma, if you have ever hugged her tight and told her she is safe with you, then do an old woman a favor before you keep watching. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, share this with someone who still calls their grandmother every single Sunday. Now sit down, because I am about to tell you exactly what my own son did to me at my own Thanksgiving table, and exactly what happened when the sheriff opened that folder and started reading out loud. My name is Susan Cooper. I am standing in my kitchen right now, the same kitchen I have stood in for 41 years, rolling out dough for a pie that nobody in my family deserves to eat. And my hands are shaking, but not from age. They are shaking from rage, because 2 hours ago my only son looked me in the eye at my own dinner table, in front of my grandchildren, and told me I no longer live here. Let me set the scene the way it actually happened, because I want you to feel every second of it the way I felt it. It is Thanksgiving morning. The house smells like cinnamon and roasted garlic, and the candles I always light on the mantle, the ones shaped like little pilgrims that my late husband, Robert, bought me 30 years ago from a roadside stand in Vermont. I have been up since 5 in the morning basting a 22-pound turkey, because my son Stephen Cooper always says his wife Jennifer likes the skin extra crispy. And even though Jennifer has never once thanked me for a single meal I have cooked for this family, I do it anyway. That is what grandmothers do. We do it anyway. I have the good tablecloth on, the ivory one with the lace trim that only comes out twice a year. And I have set 11 places, even though I only need 9, because old habits die hard. And I always set a plate for Robert without even thinking about it anymore. My neighbor Carol, who lives 2 doors down and has been my closest friend on this street since the Clinton administration, stopped by earlier with a bottle of sparkling cider and a hug, telling me the whole block can smell my cooking from their porches. I laughed and told her that is exactly the way it should be on Thanksgiving. She left around noon, but she told me she would swing by later in the afternoon to borrow my folding chairs for her own family gathering, a detail that seemed unimportant at the time, but that I would come to be grateful for. Before the day was through, my grandchildren arrived first. Tyler, who is 14 and already taller than his father, gives me a hug that nearly knocks the wind out of me. And little Grace, who is 7 and missing her to front teeth, runs straight into my arms asking if I made the sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows, burned just a little on top, the way she likes it. I tell her, yes baby, Grandma never forgets. And for 1 hour, one single golden hour, everything in my life feels exactly the way it should feel on a holiday. My house is full. My family is loud. My oven is working overtime. I am happy. Tyler sits at the kitchen island, doing his best to steal pieces of crust off the pie before I can stop him. And Grace insists on setting the napkins herself, folding each one into a crooked triangle that she is so proud of. I do not have the heart to fix a single one. For that 1 hour, I am simply a grandmother on Thanksgiving, worried about nothing more serious than whether the gravy has enough salt in it. Then, at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, right as I am pulling the turkey out to let it rest, I hear a car door slam outside. That does not belong to my son's silver SUV. I hear a second car door. I look out my kitchen window, the one over my sink that looks out onto my front yard that I have planted with my own hands every spring for decades. And I see a police cruiser parked behind Stephen's car. My stomach drops. My first thought, the thought of every mother on this earth, is that something is wrong, that someone is hurt, that this is an emergency. I wipe my hands on my apron and hurry to the front door. And that is when I see my son Stephen standing on my porch next to a uniformed officer. And Stephen is not holding flowers. He is holding a thick manila folder. I open the door and I say, Stephen, honey, what is going on? Is everyone all right? And my son, my own son. The boy I raised alone after his father passed. The boy I put through college by working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria for 6 straight years, looks at me with a face I do not recognize. It is cold. It is a face I have never once seen him wear in 38 years of being his mother. He says, "Mom, we need to talk." And can Jennifer's dad, Officer Davis here, can he come in with us? I did not know it yet, but the officer standing on my porch was not just some random officer assigned to this call. His name is Sheriff Mark Davis. And as I would learn over the course of that horrible afternoon, he is connected to my daughter-in-law's family, and my son had specifically arranged for him to be present. That detail matters. Remember that detail, because it comes back around later in this story in a way that none of them saw coming. I let them in because what else does a mother do? I let my son into my own home, followed by a police officer, while my grandchildren are sitting at my dining table with napkins tucked into their collars waiting for dinner. And my daughter-in-law, Jennifer, is standing by the window, with her arms crossed and a look on her face that I can only describe as smug, not nervous, not sad. Smug. Stephen walks into my dining room, in front of my grandchildren, in front of the table set with my mother's china, and he opens that manila folder and slides a stack of papers across the tablecloth toward me. He says, "Mom, this house needs to be transferred. I have already spoken to a lawyer. This is an eviction notice. You have 30 days. My first instinct is to laugh, because surely this is a joke. Surely my son is not standing in my dining room on Thanksgiving reading me legal language like I am a stranger who fell behind on rent. But his face does not crack. There is no smile waiting underneath. Tyler has gone completely still in his chair, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Grace looks over at me confused, sensing that something in the air has shifted even though she cannot understand the words being said. My hands find the edge of the table to steady myself, because my knees have gone weak in a way I have never felt before. Not even the day I got the call about Robert's diagnosis. I say, "Stephen, is this some kind of a sick joke? Because if it is not funny. And I want you to stop it right now in front of these children." He does not answer right away. He looks at Jennifer instead, like he is searching her face for permission to keep going. And she gives him the smallest nod, the kind of nod you give someone when you have rehearsed this moment together in private, when you have decided in advance exactly how far you are willing to push. I want you to understand something. This is not a rental property. This is not some house I am borrowing. This is the house my husband, Robert, and I bought in 1985. With money we saved from working 2 jobs each for a decade. This is the house where Stephen took his first steps in the living room. This is the house where I nursed Robert through his final illness, in the bedroom down the hall, where I held his hand as he passed at 2 in the morning, while Stephen slept down the street in his own house because he said hospitals and sickness made him uncomfortable. This is my house. My name is the only name on that deed. I have paid the property taxes myself every single year out of my own retirement account for the 11 years since Robert died. I pick up the papers with hands that are already starting to shake, and I read the words eviction notice, and I read the words 30 days to vacate, and I read a name at the bottom of a separate document that makes my blood turn to ice. It says the property has been transferred to Stephen Cooper and Jennifer Cooper. I look up at my son and I say, "Stephen, what is this? This house is mine. I never signed anything." And Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, the woman who has sat at my table for 12 years eating food I cooked, steps forward with a folder of her own and says, "Actually, Susan, you did sign it back in March, when you had your hip surgery and you were on all those pain medications. Stephen brought papers to the hospital for you to sign. You do not remember because you were not fully with it, but your signature is right there." I feel the room spinning. I remember March. I remember the surgery. I remember Stephen visiting me in recovery, holding my hand, telling me he loved me, telling me not to worry about anything. I remember signing something, but I believed with my whole heart that I was signing a medical consent form, because that is what my son told me it was. I was on morphine. I had just had a titanium joint put into my hip. I trusted my son with my whole soul in that hospital bed. The sheriff, Mark Davis, clears his throat and says, "Ma'am, I need to inform you that if this deed transfer is valid, You are required by law to vacate this property within the timeframe stated. I have a copy of the recorded deed here with me, and that is the moment, right there at my own dining table, on Thanksgiving, in front of my grandson, Tyler, who has gone completely pale, and my granddaughter, Grace, who has started to cry because she does not understand why Grandma looks like she is about to fall down. That is the moment I realize my own son planned to have me removed from my home of 41 years on a holiday, with a police officer standing by to make sure I did not fight back. Also, he would not have to face me alone. But here is what my son did not know. Here is what Jennifer did not know. Here is what even Sheriff Mark Davis, standing there so confident with his copy of the recorded deed, did not know. Back in February, a full month before that hospital surgery, an old friend of mine named Helen, who worked for 30 years as a paralegal downtown, sat me down over coffee at our usual little diner on 5th Street and told me something that chilled me even then. She wrapped both hands around her mug, the way she always does when she has something serious to say, and she said, "Susan, I have been noticing things about Stephen. The way he asks about your finances every time he visits. The way he brought up your will twice at Sunday dinner. Casual like he was just making conversation. But Susan, nobody brings up a will twice in 1 month, unless they are thinking about it a whole lot more than twice. The way he keeps asking if you have thought about putting the house in his name for tax purposes, like that is even something that makes sense for a woman your age with a paid-off mortgage. Susan, my gut is telling me something is not right. And after 30 years working in family law offices, I have learned to trust my gut every single time. I did not want to believe her. What mother wants to believe her own son is capable of something like that? I remember sitting in that diner booth, stirring sugar into coffee. I was not even drinking anymore, telling Helen she was being paranoid, that Stephen had always been a good boy, maybe a little irresponsible with money sometimes, but never dishonest, never cruel. Helen just looked at me with those steady eyes of hers, the same eyes that used to catch every typo in every document that crossed her desk for 3 decades. And she said, "Susan, I am not telling you your son is a bad person. I am telling you that even good people do desperate things when they feel cornered. And I would rather you protect yourself and be wrong about him than not protect yourself and find out too late that I was right." Those words rattled around in my head for 2 straight weeks. But Helen has known me since I was 26 years old, since before I even married Robert. And I trust her judgment more than I trust almost anyone alive on this earth. So quietly, without telling a soul, not even my closest friends at church, not even Carol next door, I went to see a lawyer of my own. His name is Daniel Ferris, a sharp young attorney who specializes in elder law and family estate protection, recommended to me by Helen herself, and I sat across from his desk, feeling almost embarrassed, like I was betraying my own son just by walking through that door. I told him everything Helen had noticed, every small comment, every strange question about my finances, every casual mention of my will that had felt just slightly too calculated in hindsight. Daniel Ferris did something that afternoon that would end up saving me. He helped me place my house, my actual house, into an irrevocable trust, with myself as the sole beneficiary. During my lifetime, he recorded that trust properly with the county. He gave me copies of every document, sealed in an envelope, which I kept in a safety deposit box at my bank, a box that only I have access to, a box Stephen did not even know existed. So when Stephen visited me in that hospital bed in March, high on relief that his manipulative little plan seemed to be working, and had me sign what he told me was a medical form. He was not stealing my house at all. He was having me sign a fraudulent deed transfer for a property that, legally, I no longer personally owned as an individual. The house belonged to the trust, and forging or coercing a signature to transfer property that has already been placed into an irrevocable trust is not just invalid, it is a felony. Standing in my dining room that Thanksgiving afternoon, watching my son smirk, while a sheriff held up a piece of paper he believed was an ironclad legal victory, I did something I had never done in my entire life. I stayed calm. I did not scream. I did not cry. Even though every part of my heart wanted to shatter into 1,000 pieces, I looked at Sheriff Mark Davis and I said, "May I see that recorded deed you are holding? Please." He handed it to me confident, almost bored. like this was a formality before he escorted an old woman out of her own home. I looked at the document. It was dated in March, filed with the county recorder in April, showing a transfer of property from Susan Cooper as an individual to Stephen Cooper and Jennifer Cooper. I said, "Sheriff Davis, I would like you to read this deed out loud, in front of my family, all of it, every word, including the legal description of the property at the top." He looked confused, but he obliged, because that is what officers do when a citizen makes a reasonable request in her own home. He began reading, "Property located at," and he read my address, "being conveyed from Susan Cooper, individually." I stopped him right there. I said, "Sheriff, I have not owned this property individually since February of this year. This property was placed into the Susan R. Cooper Family Trust to full months before that document was signed. I have the recorded trust documents. I have the notarized letter from my attorney. I have witnesses. Whatever my son coerced me into signing, while I was under the influence of prescribed narcotics, following major surgery, he coerced me into signing a document, transferring a property that legally belonged to a trust, not to me as an individual, which means the deed you are holding in your hand is not just questionable, it is fraudulent. And I believe my son knew that when he brought papers to my hospital bed and told a sedated, post-surgical 71-year-old woman that she was signing a medical consent form. The dining room went completely silent. Grace had stopped crying and was staring at her father with wide, confused eyes, her small hands gripping the edge of the tablecloth so tightly. Her knuckles had gone pale. Tyler had his phone out, and though I did not know it in that moment, my brave 14-year-old grandson had already started recording the entire conversation on his phone, sitting quietly, capturing every single word, his thumb resting still and steady on the screen, even as his face had gone completely white with shock. It was right around this moment that Carol, my neighbor, knocked on my front door. Remembering she had said she would swing by for the folding chairs, she let herself in, the way she has done 1,000 times over the 20 years we have lived, to doors apart, calling out my name cheerfully as she stepped into the front hallway. And she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the scene in my dining room, a police cruiser visible through the front window, my son standing over me with a stack of legal papers, my grandchildren frozen in their seats. Carol has known me long enough, and known Stephen since he was a boy, riding his bicycle up and down our street, to understand immediately that something was deeply wrong. She did not say a word. She simply walked over and stood directly behind my chair, placing both hands on my shoulders, a silent, solid presence, letting me know I was not facing this alone. That small act of quiet loyalty, a neighbor refusing to leave a friend's side in her darkest moment, is something I will never, ever forget as long as I live. Stephen's face went white. Jennifer's smug little smile disappeared entirely. And Sheriff Mark Davis, a man who takes an oath to uphold the law regardless of who is family and who is not, lowered that piece of paper slowly and looked at my son with an expression that had shifted completely from routine officer duty to something much more serious. He said, "Mr. Cooper, is what your mother is saying true? Was this document signed while she was under medical sedation? And did you represent it to her as something other than a property transfer?" Stephen started stammering. He said, "That is not, I mean, she needed to sign it. We were just trying to protect the family's assets. My mother is getting older. We were thinking ahead." I said, "Stephen, I raised you better than to lie to a police officer standing in the home. You were just trying to steal from me." Jennifer tried to jump in, saying that I was confused, that I did not understand the legal complexities, that this was all a misunderstanding that could be worked out as a family. But Sheriff Davis held up his hand and asked me directly if I could produce the trust documentation. I told him it was in my safety deposit box, and I could have it in his hands within the hour if he wished to accompany me to the bank himself. That afternoon, that terrible, unforgettable Thanksgiving afternoon, instead of eating turkey with my family, I rode in the front seat of Sheriff Mark Davis's cruiser to my bank, my untouched Thanksgiving plate sitting cold on the counter behind me, my apron still tied around my waist because I had not even thought to take it off. The streets were empty, the way they always are on a holiday afternoon. Every storefront dark, every parking lot vacant except for the bank itself, which thankfully had a branch manager on emergency call for exactly this kind of situation. A woman named Patricia, who met us at the door despite it being her day off, because Daniel Ferris had apparently given her direct instructions months earlier that if I ever needed emergency access to that box for any reason, she was to make it happen, no matter the day or the hour. Sheriff Davis was quiet for most of that drive, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the road, and I remember him finally speaking when we were about halfway there, saying, "Mrs. Cooper, I want you to know that whatever the outcome of this turns out to be, what your son did today, using my presence to intimidate you into leaving your own home, that is not something I am going to be comfortable with, regardless of how this shakes out." I told him I appreciated his honesty, and I meant it, because in a moment when I felt more alone than I had in years, this stranger in a uniform was the only person in that car willing to say plainly that something wrong had happened to me. Patricia walked me back to the vault herself, waited patiently, while my hands, still shaking, fumbled with the small brass key, and helped me carry the sealed envelope out to the lobby, where Sheriff Davis was waiting. I handed him certified copies of the trust agreement, dated and notarized a full month before the hospital surgery, along with Daniel Ferris's business card and a notarized letter explaining the circumstances under which the trust had been established. Sheriff Davis called the county recorder's emergency line right there in the lobby, reading off case numbers and filing dates while Patricia and I stood beside him in silence. And I remember holding my breath so hard, my chest actually ached. Because everything, my home, my future, my entire sense of safety, hinged on whether that trust had been filed correctly, whether Daniel Ferris had done his job as thoroughly as I had trusted him to. He confirmed with the county recorder's emergency line that the trust was properly filed, every document in order, every date checking out exactly the way it needed to. And within 2 hours of my son handing me an eviction notice at my own Thanksgiving table, the situation had completely and totally reversed itself. Sheriff Davis informed Stephen and Jennifer, right there in my driveway with my neighbors, starting to peek out their windows at the commotion, that the deed transfer they filed was fraudulent, that it had been executed using a signature obtained under coercive and deceptive circumstances on a property that did not individually belong to me at the time of signing, and that this matter would be referred immediately to the district attorney's office for investigation into elder fraud and forgery. I want to tell you, watching my son's face when he understood what was happening, watching the color drain out of him as he realized that the plan he had been building for months, maybe even longer, had just collapsed in front of his own children, was one of the strangest feelings I have ever experienced. Part of me, a very small human part of me, felt something close to satisfaction, but most of me just felt heartbroken, because this was still my son, the boy I rocked to sleep every night, for the first 2 years of his life, because he had colic so bad the doctors thought something was wrong with him, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were the prettiest flowers in the world. That boy had grown into a man who tried to have his own mother evicted from her home on a holiday, with a police officer standing by so she would not be able to fight back. The investigation that followed over the coming weeks uncovered even more than the fraudulent deed, and every new discovery felt like another small stab wound opening up in a place I thought could not possibly hurt any worse. Once Daniel Ferris, my attorney, got involved formally, and once the district attorney's fraud unit started pulling bank records and credit reports, they discovered that Stephen had also opened two credit cards in my name 8 months earlier, without my knowledge or consent, using my social security number and a copy of my driver's license he must have taken from my purse during one of his visits. He had charged nearly $11,000 on those cards, money that went toward a boat he and Jennifer had purchased that summer, a 20-foot fishing boat I had actually seen once, parked in their driveway and had complimented, never once suspecting that a portion of it had been paid for with credit opened fraudulently in my name. They discovered he had also attempted unsuccessfully to add himself as a joint account holder on my retirement savings account at the credit union back in June. An attempt that was flagged and denied by an alert branch manager named Rosa, who called me directly to confirm before processing it. A call I remembered receiving and thinking nothing more of at the time, assuming it was simply routine bank procedure. Rosa's caution and diligence that day, a phone call that took maybe 90 seconds, ended up being one more piece of evidence that helped prove a clear and deliberate pattern of financial exploitation stretching back many months before that Thanksgiving. I made a point, months later, once everything had settled, of going back into that branch just to thank Rosa personally, bringing her a small potted plant and a card, because I do not think people who quietly do their jobs correctly and save someone's entire life in the process get thanked nearly often enough. She cried a little when I handed her that card and told me she thinks about that phone call often, wondering what would have happened if she had simply processed the request without pausing to double check with me first. Investigators also found records of a failed business venture Stephen and Jennifer had poured money into the previous year, an online retail operation selling outdoor equipment that had collapsed within 8 months, leaving them with debts neither of them had disclosed to anyone in the family. Debts that had apparently grown desperate enough by that autumn that Stephen began looking for any possible way to access money quickly. And unfortunately for both of us, his own aging mother's home and retirement savings looked like the fastest, quietest solution available to him. Piece by piece, the picture became devastatingly clear. This was not a single moment of desperation or bad judgment on my son's part. This had been building for the better part of a year, maybe longer. Stephen and Jennifer had financial troubles from the boat purchase, from credit card debt, from a business investment that had failed spectacularly and left them owing more than either of them had ever admitted to me or to anyone else in the family. And rather than come to me honestly, rather than sit down at my kitchen table, the way families are supposed to, and say, "Mom, we are struggling. We need help. We made some bad decisions, and we do not know how to fix them," my son chose instead to systematically plan the theft of my home and my savings, culminating in an eviction notice served at Thanksgiving dinner with a sheriff standing by for backup. A plan cold enough and calculated enough that it still takes my breath away when I think about it even now. Years later, the district attorney's office moved forward with charges against Stephen for attempted fraud, forgery, and elder financial exploitation. Jennifer, it turned out, had been an active participant, not just a bystander, and she was charged as well. Once phone records and emails surfaced showing she had been the one who first suggested finding a legal way. Her words exactly, a legal way to, quote, deal with the house situation before mom gets any older and things get complicated. Sheriff Mark Davis, to his credit, and I want to say this clearly because I believe good, honest people deserve to be recognized, recused himself from any further official involvement in the case the very next day. Once he understood that his own daughter Jennifer was one of the accused, he told the investigating detective everything he had witnessed at my house that Thanksgiving afternoon. Every word he had read off that fraudulent deed, every reaction on my son's face, because he said, and I remember these words exactly because Daniel Ferris told them to me afterward, "Family is family, but the law is the law." And an elderly woman almost lost her home today because to people I care about decided her well-being mattered less than their own comfort. Now here is where I have to be honest with you, because I promised when I started telling you this story that I would give you the real truth, not some polished version. For the first several weeks after that Thanksgiving, I wanted my son to suffer. I will not pretend otherwise. I wanted Stephen to feel exactly what he had tried to make me feel, standing in my own dining room holding an eviction notice, watching my grandchildren's faces crumble in confusion and fear. I wanted Jennifer to lose everything they had been so desperate to protect by stealing from me. Some nights I lay awake in my own bed, in my own house, the house I had fought so hard to keep, and I felt something in my chest that I am not proud of, something sharp and burning, that wanted my son to be punished as severely as the law would allow. Tyler, my grandson, the same brave boy who had quietly recorded that entire conversation on his phone, without anyone noticing. That recording became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. He came to me about 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, sat down next to me on my porch swing, the same swing his grandfather built with his own hands the summer before Tyler was born, and he said, "Grandma, I am so sorry about what Dad did. I do not know how to feel about him anymore." And that, right there, that broken look on my 14-year-old grandson's face, that was the moment something shifted in me. Because I realized that whatever happened to Stephen, whatever punishment the courts decided was fair, my grandchildren still needed a family that was not built entirely on rubble and rage. They needed to see that even when someone we love does something unforgivable, there is still a path back to something resembling peace, even if it is not the same relationship it used to be. I told Tyler that his father had made a terrible, terrible choice, and that choices have consequences, and that I was not going to protect his father from those consequences just because he was my son. But I also told Tyler that I loved his father, that I would always love his father, because that love did not simply evaporate the moment he betrayed me. I told him that being someone's mother means loving them even when you are furious with them, even when they hurt you in ways you never imagined possible. The criminal case against Jennifer moved forward fully. Her father, Sheriff Davis, having recused himself entirely, and even having testified against his own daughter with a steadiness that I still find remarkable to this day, watched as Jennifer pled guilty to a reduced charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, receiving 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a restitution order to repay every dollar she and Stephen had fraudulently charged. Stephen's case was more serious because the elder financial exploitation charge, given my age and the deliberate manipulation involved during my post-surgical recovery, carried heavier weight under the law. His attorney negotiated a plea deal. Stephen pled guilty to forgery and attempted elder fraud, and he was sentenced to 18 months, with the possibility of parole after serving a portion of that sentence, along with a restitution order and a permanent restriction that prevents him from ever again being named on any of my financial or property accounts. I sat in that courtroom on the day of his sentencing, in the second row, with Carol on one side of me, holding my hand tightly, and Helen on the other. And I want to tell you, watching my son in a jumpsuit, watching him look back at me from the defendant's table with tears streaming down his face, mouthing the words "I am sorry, Mom," over and over, was one of the most complicated moments of my entire life. His attorney stood beside him and read a prepared statement, acknowledging the severity of what he had done, and the prosecutor, a serious young woman named Miss Alvarez, who had handled elder fraud cases for 6 years, read out the full timeline of Stephen's actions in flat, procedural language that somehow made everything sound even more chilling than it had felt living through it. She detailed the forged deed, the fraudulent credit cards, the failed attempt to access my retirement account, and the calculated decision to arrange for a sheriff to be present at the eviction, so that any resistance from me could be handled, in her words, with the appearance of legal authority rather than family confrontation. Because I had spent months feeling entitled to my anger, feeling justified in wanting him punished as severely as the law allowed. And yet in that courtroom, listening to a stranger read out the worst things my son had ever done in his life in that same flat procedural tone, all I could see was the little boy with colic, who I rocked every single night for 2 years straight, walking him up and down our narrow hallway at 3 in the morning, while Robert slept because one of us needed to be functional for work the next day. All I could see was the boy who brought me dandelions from the yard, cupped so carefully in his small hands, telling me they were the prettiest flowers in the whole world, and believing it with his entire 6-year-old heart. I did something in that courtroom that surprised even myself. When the judge asked if the victim, meaning me, wished to make a statement before sentencing, I stood up. My hands were not shaking this time. I looked directly at my son, and I said, "Your Honor, my son did something to me that I will carry for the rest of my life. He tried to take my home, my security, and my dignity, on a day meant for gratitude, in front of my grandchildren, and he did it with calculation and cold intent. I do not excuse what he did. I do not minimize it. But I am asking this court to remember that punishment and redemption are not opposites. I ask that whatever sentence is handed down include a real path for my son to make amends, because I still believe, even now, even after everything, that people can become better than the worst thing they have done. The judge, an older woman herself, someone who I could tell had seen more family tragedies in her courtroom than most people see in a lifetime, looked at me for a long moment before proceeding with sentencing. 18 months is what my son received. 18 months to sit somewhere quiet and think about what he did to his own mother. I visited him twice during his incarceration, not because I felt he deserved my visits, but because I needed to see with my own eyes whether the son I remembered was still in there somewhere, buried under all the greed and desperation and bad decisions that had led him to that dining room table with an eviction notice in his hands. The first visit was silent mostly. I drove myself 2 hours to that facility, sat in a plastic chair bolted to the floor, in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, and waited for them to bring my son out in that orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller somehow, less like the confident man who had slid an eviction notice across my dining room table, and more like a frightened boy playing dress up in clothes far too heavy for him. We sat across from each other in that visiting room, and neither of us knew what to say. What do you say to your own child after something like that? I love you does not undo an eviction notice. I forgive you does not undo the fear I saw on my granddaughter's face when she realized her father was trying to take her grandmother's home away. So we mostly just sat there, two people who used to know each other completely, now feeling like strangers wearing familiar faces, exchanging small, careful sentences about the weather, about Tyler's grades, about anything at all. That was not the actual reason either of us was sitting in that room. The second visit, about a year into his sentence, was different. Stephen had been attending mandatory financial counseling and a program for offenders dealing with family-related crimes, and something in him had genuinely started to shift. His eyes were clearer that day. He sat up straighter. He told me about the men he had met inside, men who had done far worse than him, men who had never once had a mother, who still showed up, men who taught him, in his own words, what it actually looks like to lose everything and everyone, because he still had me, even angry, even hurt, sitting across that table from him. He told me he understood. Now, really understood, not just intellectually but in his bones, what he had done to me, and he described it back to me in detail. I had not expected. The calculation of the hospital bed signature, the cold arrangement of having Jennifer's father present as backup, the decision to do it on Thanksgiving specifically, because he knew I would be too shocked and too concerned about upsetting the children to fight back in the moment. Hearing him describe his own cruelty so plainly was almost harder to sit through than the crime itself had been. He told me Jennifer had filed for divorce during his incarceration, unable or unwilling to face what their marriage had become, and that he did not blame her, because he said he did not know if he could face what he had become either, not for a long while yet. And then he asked me the question I had been waiting a year and a half for him to ask. He said, "Mom, is there any way you could ever forgive me? Not because I deserve it. I do not think I do, but because I do not know how to keep being a father to Tyler and Grace. And someday, maybe, a better man. If I cannot find a way to make peace with what I did to you, I want to be completely honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty after sitting with me through this whole story." Forgiveness did not happen in that visiting room, in one single tearful moment, the way it sometimes happens in movies. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, the kind that actually holds up over years and not just seconds, is slower than that. It is a process. It is choosing, again and again, on the hard days and the easy days, both, to release a little more of the resentment you are carrying. I told my son that day that I was willing to try, not to forget, not to pretend it never happened, not to hand him back my trust the way you hand back a set of keys, but to try slowly, carefully, to rebuild something between us, brick by brick, the same way you rebuild anything that has been badly damaged. Stephen was released after serving 14 months, with the remaining time converted to supervised probation and continued financial counseling. When he walked out of that facility, I was there, standing in the parking lot beside my car, the same car I drove myself, at 73 years old, by that point, because I refused to let anyone tell me I am too old to be independent. He walked toward me slowly, like he was not sure he had the right to close that distance. And when he finally reached me, he did not say anything at all. He just wrapped his arms around me and cried into my shoulder the way he used to cry into my shoulder when he was a little boy who skinned his knee on the sidewalk out front. And I held him, because that is what mothers do, even mothers who have been betrayed in ways that most people cannot even imagine. It has been 3 years now since that Thanksgiving. Stephen lives about 20 minutes from me now, in a small one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. Nothing fancy, nothing close to the life he and Jennifer once had with their boat and their vacations, and their new furniture every couple of years. He works an honest job managing inventory for a hardware supply company, a job Daniel Ferris actually helped him find through a contact of his, and he shows up there every single morning at 7, rain or shine, because he told me once that having somewhere to be, something honest to do with his hands and his time, is part of what keeps him from sliding backward into the kind of thinking that got him into that dining room with an eviction notice in the first place. He pays restitution every single month without fail, a fixed amount that comes directly out of his paycheck before he even sees it. And though the total debt will take him years yet to fully repay, he has never once been late, never once asked for an extension, never once complained to me about the weight of it, even on the months when I know money must be tight for him. He sold the boat within the first year, along with most of the nicer furniture he and Jennifer had bought, using every dollar toward the restitution, a decision his old friends found surprising, but that I found to be one of the clearest signs yet that something in him had genuinely, permanently changed. He is rebuilding his relationship with Tyler and Grace slowly and carefully, taking them for pizza every other Friday, showing up to Tyler's baseball games, even when it means leaving work early and losing a few hours of pay, sitting through Grace's dance recitals in a folding chair in the back row, clapping the loudest of anyone in the auditorium, even though his daughter's routine only lasts 90 seconds. Last spring he even started coaching Grace's small recreational soccer team on Saturday mornings, something Grace begged him to do for months, before he finally worked up the nerve to say yes. And watching him kneel down on that muddy field, patiently tying the shoelaces of a 6-year-old teammate, who was not even his own child, was one of the strangest and most healing sights I think I have witnessed in these past 3 years. He comes to Sunday dinner most weeks, though we have an understanding, an unspoken one, that we do not talk about the deed. We do not talk about the courtroom. We do not talk about the 18 months, unless he brings it up first. Sometimes he does. Sometimes out of nowhere, in the middle of passing the mashed potatoes, he will set down the serving spoon and say, "Mom, I need you to know again how sorry I am." And I let him say it every single time, because I think saying it out loud, again and again, for as long as it takes, is part of how he keeps himself honest with both of us. Carol tells me she has never in her life seen a grown man cry over mashed potatoes, the way my son sometimes does. And I tell her that is exactly the kind of man I am hoping he is becoming. One who is not afraid anymore to feel the full weight of what he did. Tyler has grown even closer to Daniel Ferris over these past 3 years, spending some of his school breaks doing filing work in Daniel's office, just to be around the profession. And he tells anyone who will listen that watching a lawyer protect his grandmother, when it mattered most, is the reason he wants to study law himself someday, maybe even elder law specifically, so he can help other families avoid what almost happened to ours. Grace, for her part, remains blissfully unaware of most of the legal details, though she knows in simple terms that her father made a very big mistake and had to go away for a while to learn how to be better. And she has decided in her own 10-year-old wisdom that forgiveness is simply what you do for people you love. A lesson I sometimes think children understand more purely and more quickly than adults ever manage to. She still makes him a handmade card every single Father's Day. Glitter, glue, and construction paper and all. And I keep every single one of them in a drawer of my own, because watching a child's uncomplicated love slowly help rebuild what, too, adults nearly destroyed is one of the most healing things I have ever witnessed in my whole long life. Jennifer moved to another state after the divorce was finalized. Her relationship with her own father, Sheriff Mark Davis, remains strained to this day, though I hear through the grapevine of small town gossip that runs through this community that they have begun speaking again slowly, the way most broken things in families eventually get put back together, if the people involved are willing to do the work. Sheriff Davis still stops by my house every few months, just to check in, just to see how I am doing, and each time he apologizes again for the part he unknowingly played that Thanksgiving, and each time I tell him the same thing, that he has nothing to apologize for, that he was the one honest man in that entire dining room the day my whole world nearly fell apart. My house, my beautiful house, with 41 years of memories soaked into every wall, remains fully protected in that trust Daniel Ferris helped me establish, and it will pass when the time comes, not to any single person, but split equally between Tyler and Grace, held in trust until they are old enough to understand the weight and responsibility of what a home like that actually means. This past Thanksgiving, the third one since that terrible day, I stood in my kitchen again, basting the turkey, the marshmallows, already burning just slightly on Grace's sweet potato casserole, exactly the way she likes it, and I watched my family gather around my table again. Tyler is 17 now, taller than ever, studying to be a paralegal himself, inspired, he tells me, by watching Daniel Ferris fight for his grandmother when it mattered most. Grace is 10, missing different teeth now, and she still runs into my arms the exact same way she did when she was 7. And Steven sat at that table, in the same chair he sat in the day he handed me an eviction notice. And when it came time to say what we were grateful for, the way we do every year before we eat, my son looked at me with eyes that were finally truly clear, and he said, I am grateful. My mother is a better person than I ever was, and that she gave me a chance to try to be better too. I do not tell you this story to make my son look like a hero. He is not a hero. What he did to me was cruel and calculated, and it nearly cost me everything I spent my whole life building. But I also do not tell you this story to make him into a monster forever, because people, even people who fail us in devastating ways, are capable of becoming something different than the worst version of themselves, if they are willing to do the hard, humbling work it takes to change. What I want you to take from this story is simple. Protect yourself. Please, if you are an older parent listening to me right now, do not assume that love within a family automatically means safety. Put your important documents somewhere secure. Talk to a lawyer you trust, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels like you are betraying your own children by protecting yourself from them. I am telling you, from the bottom of my heart, that the trust I quietly established months before that Thanksgiving is the only reason I still have a roof over my head today. If I had not listened to my friend Helen, if I had not trusted my own instincts, I would have lost my home of 41 years to my own son, and I might never have found my way back to any kind of peace with him at all. And if you still have your grandmother in your life, if she is still there to answer the phone when you call, still there to burn the marshmallows just a little on your favorite dish, please, go hug her today. Tell her you love her. Do not wait for a Thanksgiving that turns into a nightmare to realize how much she has sacrificed for you quietly, without ever once asking for anything in return. Now, before you go, I want to know all about you. Tell me your name down in the comments below. Tell me what city and what state or what country you are watching this from, because I love hearing how far these stories travel. How many different kitchens and living rooms and front porches this old woman's voice has somehow found its way into. Tell me your age too, because whether you are 17 like my grandson Tyler, or 71 like me, I promise you, this story belongs to you just as much as it belongs to me. And if you love your grandma, if this story moves something in your heart the way I hope it did, then please, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another one of my stories. And share this with someone, a friend, a sister, a coworker, anyone at all, who still believes that even after the deepest betrayal, there is always a road back to love. If two people are brave enough to walk it together, leave a comment telling me one thing your own grandmother taught you. Something small, something you still carry with you even now. Because I read every single comment on these videos, late at night with a cup of tea in my hands, and I promise you, your words matter more to this old woman than you could possibly know. Before I go, I want to tell you a few more small things that happened in the months after that Thanksgiving, because I think the little details matter just as much as the big dramatic ones. And I do not want you walking away from this story thinking everything wrapped up neatly the very next week, because it did not. Word got around our family quickly, the way word always does in a family this size. My sister Patricia, who lives 3 states away and has never been shy about sharing her opinion, called me the very night of Thanksgiving after Tyler, bless that boy, sent her a message telling her what had happened. Patricia was on a plane to visit me within 48 hours, showing up on my doorstep with a suitcase and a look of pure fury on her face that almost made me laugh despite everything, because Patricia has always been the fiercest protector in our family. Ever since we were girls sharing a bedroom growing up, she sat with me at my kitchen table for 3 straight days, helping me organize paperwork for Daniel Ferris, cooking meals so I would not have to, and reminding me every single morning that none of what had happened was my fault, that I had done nothing wrong except trust my own son the way a mother is supposed to be able to trust her child. My cousin Rita, who I had not spoken to in nearly 2 years after a small falling out over something so unimportant, now that I genuinely cannot even remember what it was, called me out of the blue that December and said, "Susan, life is too short for grudges." And what your family just lived through reminded me of that. We have talked every single week since, and I am grateful, in a strange way, that even something as painful as what Stephen did manage to mend a relationship I thought was broken beyond repair. We have since taken 2 small trips together, just the 2 of us, something we had not done since we were young women. And last month she told me that watching me survive that Thanksgiving and come out the other side still capable of love gave her the courage to finally repair a rift with her own estranged daughter, a rift that had nothing at all to do with me or with Stephen, but that somehow my story had still managed to reach across and touch. Not everyone in the family responded with kindness, and I think it is important I tell you that too, because these stories are rarely as simple as heroes and villains. Stephen's cousin on his father's side, a man named Douglas, who had always been close to Stephen growing up, actually took Stephen's side at first, telling anyone who would listen that families should handle these things privately, that involving the courts was an overreaction, that surely there was some misunderstanding that could have been worked out over a cup of coffee instead of a criminal trial. Douglas even went so far as to send me a letter that winter, several pages long, accusing me of being vindictive, of caring more about punishing my son than about keeping the family together. A letter that stung far more than I expected it to, coming as it did from someone who had known Stephen since they were both small boys building forts in my backyard. Douglas and I do not speak much anymore. I do not hold it against him entirely, because I understand that watching someone you love face consequences is its own kind of painful. But I also could not, and still cannot, accept the idea that what happened to me was some small misunderstanding that did not deserve to be taken seriously. My church community became an unexpected source of strength during those months. Pastor Williams, who has led our congregation for almost 20 years now, came to visit me personally the week after Thanksgiving, sat with me in my living room over a cup of tea that had long gone cold by the time either of us thought to drink it, and told me something I have carried with me ever since. He said, "Susan, forgiveness is not a gift you give to the person who hurt you. It is a gift you give to yourself, so that the weight of what happened does not live in your body for the rest of your life. You can forgive Stephen, in your own time, in your own way, and still hold him fully accountable for what he did. Those 2 things are not in conflict with each other." I did not fully understand what he meant that day, sitting in my living room, still raw from everything. But over the following months, as I watched my son slowly begin the long work of becoming someone different, I came to understand exactly what Pastor Williams meant. The women from my Thursday morning prayer group brought meals to my house every single week for nearly 2 months straight. without me ever having to ask, without me ever having to explain more than the basic outline of what had happened. Betty brought her famous chicken and dumplings. Loretta brought banana bread that she insisted was her late mother's recipe, though I suspect she has improved on it considerably over the years. Small kindnesses like that, warm dishes left on my porch with handwritten notes tucked underneath the foil, did more to hold me together during those dark weeks than almost anything else could have. I also want to tell you about the moment, about 4 months after the sentencing, when I finally sat Tyler and Grace down together and explained everything to them in language appropriate for their ages, because up until that point they had only understood pieces of the story, fragments overheard from adult conversations, and I did not want them growing up with half-truths and confusion about something this important. I told Tyler, who was old enough to understand most of it, the full details, the deed, the credit cards, the retirement account, all of it. I told Grace a simpler version, that her father had made choices that hurt Grandma very badly, and that he was working very hard to become a better person, and that it was all right for her to still love her father, while also understanding that what he did was wrong. Grace, in her 7-year-old wisdom at the time, looked at me and said, "Grandma, can you love someone and be mad at them at the same time?" And I told her, "Sweetheart, that is exactly what love actually is. Most of the time, for almost everybody." I think about that conversation often, because out of the mouths of children sometimes comes the plainest, truest wisdom that adults spend their whole lives trying to relearn. There is one more thing I want to share with you before I close out this story. Something that happened just this past spring that, I think, ties everything together in a way I never could have planned. Daniel Ferris invited me to speak briefly at a small community seminar he organizes twice a year for older adults in our area. A free workshop about protecting yourself financially and legally as you age. The exact kind of workshop that, looking back, I wish someone had invited me to attend a full year before that Thanksgiving. I stood up in front of maybe 40 people, mostly women my age and a little older, some with their adult children sitting supportively beside them, and I told them a shortened version of what happened to me. I watched their faces as I spoke, watched the recognition dawn in some of their eyes, the quiet fear in others, because I think almost everyone in that room either knew someone this had happened to, or worried, somewhere in the back of their mind, that it could happen to them too. After I finished speaking, an older gentleman named Frank came up to me, tears in his eyes, and told me his own daughter had tried something almost identical 2 years earlier, though in his case there had been no trust in place to protect him, and he had lost nearly $40,000 before he even realized what was happening. He thanked me for having the courage to speak publicly about something so painful, and he told me that hearing my story gave him the strength to finally, after 2 years of silence, tell his own story to his support group at the senior center. That conversation with Frank, more than almost anything else that has happened since that Thanksgiving, reminded me why I eventually agreed to start sharing these stories the way I do now. Sitting in my kitchen talking into a camera, telling strangers across the internet the most painful chapters of my own life, because somewhere out there, I truly believe, is another Susan, another grandmother sitting at her own kitchen table, wondering if the strange questions her son has been asking about her finances mean anything at all, and if my story, if the trust I set up because I trusted my gut and I trusted Helen, if that story can save even one more person's home, one more person's dignity, then every uncomfortable moment of telling it out loud has been worth it 100 times over. Daniel Ferris tells me now that in the 3 years since my case became something of a cautionary tale in local legal circles, he has seen a genuine increase in older clients coming to him proactively before any crisis hits, asking about trusts and protective legal structures, simply because a friend or a family member had heard about what almost happened to me. There is something almost redemptive in that, in knowing that the worst afternoon of my entire life has quietly become the reason other families are protecting themselves before it is too late, before some version of that manila folder ever makes its way to their own dining room table. I want to leave you with one final thought before we close this story out together. People sometimes ask me, in the comments of these videos, whether I regret forgiving Stephen, whether I think I let him off too easily, whether a real deserved punishment would have meant cutting him out of my life completely. and never looking back. I understand why people ask that question, and I do not judge anyone who would have made a different choice in my position, because every family, every wound, every relationship is different, and there is no single right way to survive a betrayal like this one. But for me, the answer has always been the same. Justice and forgiveness. We're never actually in competition with each other in my story. Stephen faced real consequences. He spent 14 months in a facility away from his children, away from his freedom, away from the comfortable life he had been trying so desperately and so wrongly to protect. He is still paying restitution, dollar by dollar, every single month, and he will be for years to come. He carries a criminal record now that will follow him for the rest of his life. Into every job application, every background check, every conversation with a new person he tries to build trust with. Justice happened. The law did exactly what the law is supposed to do, and forgiveness happened alongside it, not instead of it, because I decided, slowly, painfully, over months and then years, that I did not want to spend whatever years I have left on this earth carrying the full, crushing weight of that Thanksgiving afternoon in my chest every single day. I decided that my son's worst moment, as devastating as it was, did not have to be the final word on who he could still become. I decided that my grandchildren deserved a grandmother who modeled what it looks like to hold someone accountable and still leave the door open for them to walk back through it if they were willing to do the work. That is the whole truth of what happened to me. Not a fairy tale, not a simple story of good versus evil, just an old woman who nearly lost everything on a holiday that was supposed to be about gratitude, who found a strength inside herself she did not know she had, who watched the law work exactly the way it should, and who chose, in the end, to love her son through the hardest chapter either of them will ever live through. I think about that Thanksgiving often, more than I probably should, but not in the way you might expect. I do not replay it to relive the pain anymore. I replay it because it reminds me of something I never fully understood before that day, which is how much quiet strength a person can find in themselves when everything they love is suddenly on the line. I was 71 years old, standing in my own dining room, watching my whole world tilt sideways, and somewhere underneath the fear, I found a steadiness I did not know I still had in me. That steadiness came from Helen's warning months earlier. It came from Daniel Ferris's careful paperwork. It came from Carol's hands on my shoulders when she refused to walk away. It came from Tyler's quiet courage with that phone recording. None of us can protect ourselves entirely alone. We protect each other, quietly, patiently, long before the worst day ever arrives. And that is the real lesson buried inside everything I have told you today. Thank you for sitting with me today. Thank you for listening to an old woman tell her story. I will see you in the next one.